And Gareth, I know you've got some slides up already. I just wondered if you wanted to give us an update on what's changed over the last year, and what can we maybe expect from this really exciting world.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and good to join you all again. I'm just sharing up actually something from last year to give you a recap. But the key thing to highlight, I think, is the fact that we have this problem of self-reporting, solely relying on self-reporting thus far with ESG metrics for the community. And Earth observation data, as I particularly highlighted last time, gives us this kind of key extra tool to provide objective, independent verification of self-reporting. And that's what I'm showing here is from last year, a program we worked on, which was to verify tailings dams locations from what has been self-reported, self-disclosed by corporates. And then we see actually, what is the reality, and that gives us this kind of unique, global, independent, objective tool, which is provided by satellite remote sensing. And that's really kind of unique in that sense, amongst other sensing tools, to be able to give us something to check and balance against what we currently use as a majority for ESG reporting. So I'd like to share a little bit more and talk a little bit more about what's new, what's developing, and how things are growing in this space. So got a few slides, but the key point is there's a lot of satellites. There's a lot of capability that has blown up in the last few years. Earth observation satellites, it's really a trend of just sensors, low-cost sensor technology that might be IoT sensors deployed on the ground, but also in space. The cost of deploying these things has plummeted, and the capabilities have exploded and grown. So we have a lot of sensing, a lot of data, and something again I shared last year was to show that we can observe anywhere in the world with this data. No borders, no boundaries. We have a lot of data, and that's growing all the time. New satellites, imaging satellites, thermal sensing satellites, emissions, gas emissions satellites and sensors. The capability is growing. So the key thing, though, is that's a lot of data, that's a lot of observation capability, but so what? How do we turn that into something useful for the ESG community, into a toolbox, the subject of this session? So you've got to be able to turn that into some sort of metrics, something that's actually usable and something that can be actioned by ESG analysts, etc., financial analysts, and investors, anyone looking to assess performance of the industry. And that's particularly the sort of things we're working on with the European Space Agency, for example. I'm just showing a program we're working on, big program, and has the objective and the mission to shine a light on the oil and gas and energy sector using satellite technology to be able to create new, unique observation points that weren't there before, but also create more timely data. So you can see things instead of waiting months, whole quarters, whole years to hear back from self-reporting and company reports. We can see data weekly, daily in some cases. And so picking key points along supply chains, along oil and gas supply chain, and then replicate the same blueprint along mining supply chain. There's a lot of capabilities. There's a lot of satellites mentioned there. Images, photographs you've seen, but radar, thermal imaging, gas sensing, huge amount of capability that's growing. So to turn it into metrics is the key thing, and that's really the focus, is we've got to make it useful. We've got to make it into something that we can actually consume, use, and pass on to end users without having to worry about these satellites and space assets there, and how do you actually connect to that data. So turning that into data feeds is one thing, but then turning it into actually true reporting. So I'm just going to show a couple of examples of flaring monitoring, for instance. using thermal satellites. One example is being able to monitor anywhere in the world where there's natural gas flaring being done by the oil and gas industry, or any industry, refineries, smelters, anywhere where they're flaring gas. Surprisingly, happens a lot in a surprising number of industries and sectors. But particularly, we're looking at probably the most active place in the world, which is West Texas in the Permian Basin, which is the home of the fracking boom. The flaring activity dropped last year, of course, with COVID going, but then is back on the rise again, and we see that on a daily basis. But that reporting hasn't come out yet necessarily to show that this year it's up again. It's not yet disclosed. So we have near real-time observations to check against disclosures, but we also get them early as well, so we can take action, and stakeholders can take action. And this is another example of reporting, basically satellite observations turned into reporting. So tracking oil and gas wells being constructed, built, where they are in their production. Just highlight here the blue little charts here show basically early reporting from satellites versus disclosed reporting in the orange, which is always lagging by a couple of months or underreported until it eventually catches up. So that's really the key and the nub of it, of getting the satellite data, being able to turn it into reporting metrics.
Fantastic. And so, I mean, I think with this, Gareth, I mean, what you're showing here is that you can utilize this data, and I'm going to ask you in a second how available these data sets are. Is it something that anybody can get their hands on, or where does this data actually come from in the first place? So you take this data, and then the real trick is turning it into something that's usable. I guess working with people who truly understand what they're looking at as well. So yesterday we heard from some fantastic social scientists saying, yep, they can buddy up with people such as yourselves and say, okay, what are we actually looking at on the ground? What is real in terms of what we're looking at? So just to come back to that original question, and actually, so Jamie Strauss has posed it to us through the panels. He's asking, all this raw information as well as the analysis provided sounds incredibly expensive, and of course incredibly difficult. Can you give some color as to the accessibility of this information, which would be appropriate for, say, small but as well as large companies?
Yeah, so that's the point really of creating, sort of reducing everything down to a sort of report. Like the satellite data is strange, exotic raw materials, essentially digital raw materials, and it's like the ingredients of a cake. We bring it together and create it into something that can actually be consumed and used. Like this is a weekly report you'd receive in your email, for instance, so it can be as a feed into another software. And so the trick is to take all of that raw information, turn it and convert it into environmental metrics, social tracking, urban expansion around mine sites, etc. All these sorts of applications, but it's got to be seen right through to the end and then reported in something digestible, affordable, and useful and actionable. So it's, and often the data sources are free. Actually, the European Space Agency, that slide I showed earlier, spent billions of dollars, euros on many satellites over the last few years, and that data is all public access, but you've got to be able to consume it and use it. So at the moment it bottlenecks into a small group of experts really who can and scientists and engineers who can do something with that data. You know, we've got to get it out to the broad market.
So that, I mean, I think that's perhaps one of the big developments that we've seen over the last few years, is it's big organizations actually paying for the hardware, as it were, so launching all of those satellites, etc., into space, and then the industry that's growing behind it is that interpretation of that data. And one of the themes or the questions that has been coming gently through the conference is greenwashing, of course, is one of our big fears, because actually we want to look at what is reality. And is that something that these kind of data sets and this sort of interpretation can help say, well, what's real rather than just greenwashing?
Yeah, that's it, spot on, exactly. That's you get accusations of greenwashing to the corporates, but also to the ESG analysts who accept the reporting or pose the requirements to report X and then say, great, well done, pat on the back to us and you and yourselves, done, move on. Well, hang on, let's check it. This is like CCTV. essentially, but we've got to tell it, we've got to analyze it as well. It's complicated data, but this is a way to check things. So showing, for instance, emissions data from satellite, very new satellites, global, almost daily repeat, to measure methane, measure direct measurements of methane, not just calculating what a company thinks it's producing. And we work with a lot of corporates themselves to provide this information, because if you're running an oil and gas facility, you're not sensing and measuring by default what's coming off your facility. You're calculating what's coming off and modeling that and saying, well, I ran the generator, the equipment for X number of time, and the manufacturer specification said it might leak this by standard, and this is what I report. Well, what's happening in reality? So this gives us a chance to check that, and also then check companies are doing what they say they're going to do to reduce emissions, rather than just saying, we replace the equipment with some new equipment, and therefore that should reduce the emissions. Well, let's see, let's find out.
So it's measuring reality rather than trying to calculate what you think might be there instead. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Fantastic. So I think, I mean, with this, there's so much more, Gareth, that I'm sure you could be showing us here in terms of that change detection, looking at changes through time, and also helping us to step outside of, say, those mine sites or whatever the case might be, and say, well, what's going on in the broader context? So in that ecosystem round about that mine site, be it with regards to people, but also the environment and the biodiversity as well, which tees us up really, really nicely for the talks that we're going to go into later on this morning. I could just leave you running your slides all day, Gareth, because I know that you've got all of these fantastic graphics and images, etc., etc. So it's absolutely brilliant. But ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic Gareth Morgan. Thank you very much, Gareth. Great.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.